I think it should become a law that all small towns need an urban legend. Nothing ushers in excitement to a dull, lackluster town like a good old-fashioned ghost tale, or monster tale, or murder tale, etc. My quaint little town of Nahant, Massachusetts, holds a little over 3,000 people and can get quite boring rather easily. Attractions here are scarce, unless you like breweries or going to the Nahant beach. Things are blander than a rice cake. After school, I decided to go for a walk with my friend Steffi. We headed to the lowland park to do a couple of rounds, taking in the scenery. We were talking about pretty mundane things, like friends at school, classes, and idiot teachers we just couldn't stand. While strolling on the grassy lands and gossiping to no end, we came across a fellow classmate, Terrence. I didn't know him as well as I knew Steffi, but we were still fairly nice to each other. I decided to say hello and ask him how he was doing, not expecting much of a reply outside of a simple, "Okay." I kept walking, as did Steffi. However, he had some choice words to leash upon us. "Honestly," he began. Very confused, Steffi and I looked at each other in confusion. "Confused?" Steffi said quizzically. "About what?" I silently cursed her out, wanting to just continue on our way. Steffi was always too sociable for her own good. "Yeah, well, my friend Jacob was telling me this story about a haunted house on Harborview Road," he began. "It's a new house, too. Gray roofing, white boards, very bland looking. He told me that the folks invested tens of thousands of dollars into the place, and after 9 months, they split." Steffi and I looked at each other. We never heard any ghost stories around here before. I wasn't much of a spiritualist. Hell, neither of us were. But when you live in a boring place like Nahant, it's quite intriguing, and we listened on. From what he told me, the couple apparently took a few of their belongings before getting out, leaving the place newly furnished and everything. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself. Steffi simply looked at me and shrugged. "Well, how do you know the place is furnished, though?" Steffi asked. "Did Jacob go in there or something?" "Well, that's what he told me," Terrence replied. "He said he just got back from doing some exploring. I asked him if he wanted to hang out, but he just turned me down and went home. Must have been spooked by something." "Where is Harbor Road?" I mused. If anything, this sounded like a fun diversion. "Well, you take Ward Road south and take a right on a Castle Way, then a left, and you should be on Harborview. I don't know the exact address, though," he informed us. Steffi looked at me and smirked. "Well, I guess we know what we're doing tonight," she stated without so much as a consultation on my part. "Let's head back to the park and go." "Well, I didn't have anything better to do tonight." "Okay, thanks for the info, Terrence," I chimed. "Be careful." Jake was pretty creeped out. He was white as paper, he replied warily. "Could have been a cat or something," Steffi said. "Thanks again, Terrence. We'll be careful," she assured, and with that we went our separate ways and loaded up into my old 2005 Ford, heading in the directions given to the White House. As we turned onto Harbor Road, we scanned the houses trying to pinpoint the right one. There were a few white houses, and some had lights on and some didn't. We finally found the one we were looking for, though. "You sure that's it, Steffi?" I asked, not sure of her tracking skills. "Yeah, look at that window," she pointed. "It's cracked pretty bad. Usually if a window's being repaired, there's a plastic sheet or some other covering over it." "It's true, but it could have just been recently cracked." "Well, there's no lights on. It's almost nighttime. There should be some lights on. Might as well just check." "I guess we could look, but if we're caught, we're totally screwed." "Let's just park down the street a little bit and we could walk up," she suggested. "That way we won't get caught or ticketed." "It's a good idea," I remarked. I did as she instructed and we got out of the car. We walked down until we were directly across from the house. You know, it does look a lot creepier without the tinted car windows separating us from it. Well, normally I'd call you a sissy, but damn, you aren't kidding, Steffi remarked, straining her neck to get a good look around. The streetlights didn't provide much help, the sickly orange hue just barely lighting the slick concrete road. We crossed the street and got closer to the house. It was jarring, to say the least. You know that feeling when you're told something, having it built up, and then you're finally seeing it, not knowing what to expect? It was that feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like a juxtaposition of surprise, fear, and joy. You just scratch the surface, and then you want to see more. We walked closer and got up onto the porch of the old house, the wooden boards creaking under our heavy steps. The porch was railed in and very wide. The left side was barren, nothing but wood paneling and dust. On the right was an old rocking bench, slightly creaking in the night breeze. It wasn't moving much, but the breeze wasn't strong enough to even get it to rock as it was. Well, that's creepy, I stated bluntly. I mean, what else was there to say? Yeah, no kidding, Steffi replied. She pulled open the screen door and saw a bronze knocker with an elegant design. It seemed like something you could get from Home Depot. This knocker looks new. Might as well give it a try, she said, rapping the handle against the bronze twice. We waited for a few minutes, glancing around the neighborhood. It looked like a nice place. The houses were reasonably sized and spaced apart reasonably. The lights were god-awful, though. It gave just enough light to help passer-bys along their way. I guess nobody's home, I said. Steffi reached for the matching bronze handle and twisted it. The handle gave no resistance and activated the mechanism. The door creaked open slightly, and Steffi and I looked at each other, apprehension in our eyes. That fear was overpowered by excitement. Finally, something interesting to do in this humdrum little town, and we would be damned to an eternity in hell if we had passed this up. This turned out to be one of the most ironic thoughts I've ever had. We opened the door further and peeked inside. All right, I'll go first, I said, stepping through the doorway into the abandoned home. The thick rubber sole of my shoe met with the cold pavement, causing a clack to sound out throughout the house. I looked down and my eyes adjusted to the darkness. It was a hexagonal black and white design, with bigger shapes being joined together by a smaller one, like a demented flower. I looked around. It was a hallway. The walls were coated in a light film of dirt. I began to see better, and I saw fingerprints embedded in the dirt. What the hell? I sighed. What is it? Steffi asked in a panic, coming in after me, closing the door softly. There's fingerprints here. I was freaking out a little bit. Calm down, she began. Remember what Terrence told us? His friend Jack, or whatever his name is, came in here. He probably just used the wall to feel his way around. I thought about it and realized that she was probably right. I took in a few deep breaths, and I let my heart rate return to normal. Thanks for that, I said, giving her a meek thumbs up. I swear you'd be lost without me, she said with her hands on her hips. Let's keep going. We continued down the hallway and stumbled into the kitchen. I pulled out my iPod and used the flashlight function to see around. It wasn't the best, but on short notice, it would do. The place looked like something out of a furniture store display. A dusty but new coffee maker resting on the granite countertop. Cupboards had a smooth wooden finish, and the fridge was a grand white, with a water and ice dispenser. The sink was metallic, with not a drop of water staining the surface. Terrence wasn't joking when he relayed that story, that's for sure. The place looked like it was ready to be sold, minus the smell of rotting food and dust coating everything. Steffi coughed and looked around. On the other side of the counter was the dining and living room, joined together by a wooden arch. It was moderately spacious, nothing too magnificent. On the opposite wall, next to the fridge, was another hallway. Seeing as we had just came out of a hallway, we decided to save that for later. We began to investigate the home by entering the dining room. The table had been set with fine china, an elegant flower design emblazoned upon it. The utensils seemed to be made out of silver, or a cheap imitation of said material. The napkins were a thick cloth, and the placemats were made out of leather, with leaf designs stitched into it. There was a vase of rotted rosin, amaryllis, and daffodil plants in the center of the oak table, its legs crafted into elegant shapes. Around the table were oak chairs with velvet pillows resting on them. To the right side of the table was a window facing the street. On the windowsill were pots of plants, all dead. Having mentioned that, there was a strong plant theme going on for the dining room, as there were various flowers, dead due to neglect and the passing of time, littering it. "These guys must really dig plants, huh?" I whispered to Steffi, giving her an aside glance to the rotting carcasses of the greenery. The expenditure of this place was generous, to say the least. A TV was positioned on the opposite side of the room, kitty-cornered to the door. It was a plasma screen that stretched at least 6 feet. It was cocooned in a marvelous entertainment center made out of oak wood painted in the darkest black you could imagine, with silver handles protruding spaciously in random places, obviously where the cupboards and shelves went. Next to it was a fireplace which, upon closer inspection, had soot upon it. Along it was a giant marble angel, beautifully crafted, playing a harp. On the opposite wall were 2 red polyester chairs, with a coffee table resting in between them. On the lower shelf of the table were some magazines dedicated to life's various activities. A wide couch rested against the wall of the oak arch. The black fabric stood out like a sore thumb against the white walls, slowly peeling away. On the paper white wall was a tapestry with angels sewn in it, but was ripped at the seams, as if someone yanked on it or tore it apart. Steffi and I both looked at each other, noting how odd this was. We looked down to make sure there was nothing to trip on. The Berber carpeting had only a white rug on it. Sewed into the rug was a reflective golden string, giving off a sort of religious vibe to match the rest of the room. I angled my iPod to look a bit further down on the rug, only to notice a stain on it. It was grayed, but it was definitely there. "I guess they weren't so careful with their drinks," Stephanie joked. "Apparently. The stain is huge," I replied. I did once over the room again and saw something I missed the first time I looked at the couch. It, too, was stained. It was stained in what looked like blood and feces. I pointed this out to Steffi. She was gagging. "That's nasty," she gagged. "Why the fuck is there all this blood?" "I don't know. It's only on the couch, though, nowhere else," I observed. I felt like I was playing a watered-down version of Sherlock Holmes, but it was a noteworthy observation. The couch and the floor near it was stained in blood. Everywhere else was stain-free. And the smell made us gag, but we were big kids and we'd be fine. "Do you smell that?" Steffi asked, distracted by something else. "No, I'm too busy wondering why the hell there's all this crap and blood," I snapped back. "No, it's not that. It smells like death," she whispered. When she mentioned it, I went back into the kitchen to smell for it, and sure enough, she was right. It was faint, but death was definitely embedded in this house. "What should we do?" Stephanie asked, a nervous tone dripping from her lips. "Let's investigate it," I said. If we see a body, we make for a break for it and we call the police while we drive off. I don't know, Stephanie said, obviously apprehensive about playing a game of detective. Do you think that's really a good idea? Why don't we just leave and call them? Because if we do that, then we'll get arrested and charged for pranks, and possibly trespassing if they do a deep enough investigation. Do you feel like paying a fine? I asked harshly. Stephanie glared at me for being such a dick and responded, Okay, I see your point. Let's just take a quick look, alright? Let's try to sniff it out, she said, shaking. I agreed and apologized for being so rash with her. She accepted and we started our hunt. We took the second hallway from the kitchen we abandoned before. Entering it, we could see doors dotted at random intervals before stopping at a window. It turned out to be a small house. We turned and looked at the first door to our right and entered a bathroom. Nothing too fancy. A drawn shower curtain revealed a porcelain bathtub and shower combo, next to a porcelain toilet and, shocker, a porcelain sink. Everything in here was porcelain. God, these must have been the most pretentious decorators ever. Each room has some sort of theme to it. I mean, this is a house, not a museum, I commented. I don't know if it was the nerves or what, but I felt the need to make light of something. Steffi agreed and we left. The next room was on the left side of the hallway. We entered it and found an office. The office was probably the most normal-looking room of the bunch. It had a mahogany floor with Brunswick green walls. The desk was made of maple wood, a common choice, and tucked in the legroom was a standard blue swivel chair. There were shelves of books to the left, and some on the floor in a pile. On the wall was a single window facing the street. The only other noteworthy thing was the photographs. We saw a young couple in the middle of the photos, and framing them were either other pictures of them, or one of them with what I assumed to be their family members. The man and woman in the center photo were nothing too remarkable. Long blonde hair on the woman, and short black hair on the man. She wore a white button-up blouse, and he a black button-up shirt. She was caressing her husband's hand, which were clasping her stomach. They each had a smile on their face, and a stare that would peer into the deepest of souls. Offsetting them was a plain, covered in snow, and a dark, stormy sky. Even their pictures were artsy. Steffi was making a gagging sign with her hand, not letting the situation darken more than it already had. We then left the room behind us and ventured into the next room. Jesus Christ. The words trickled up my throat and just barely left my mouth. Steffi didn't respond. I assumed it wasn't loud enough for her to hear. I turned to her, and I saw a horrific look on her face. The room was torn apart, ransacked from the look of it, almost as if someone was looking for something. From what we could gather, this was the master bedroom. Clothes were thrown recklessly all over the place. Dresses, suits, and tops, everywhere. The bed's quilt was savagely dug into. Cotton sprawled all over the bed. The spectacular oak frame was splintered and crushed as the mattress was sunken into it. The pillows weren't even on the bed. They were tossed askew all over the room. The carpeting was torn up, showing signs of the bare floor, and the closet door was ripped off its hinges, laying on the floor. And it, too, was splintered. Sewn on the walls were thousands of scratch marks. Some scratches tore up the paint, and others painted the wall in blood. Whoever did this had their fingers worn to the bone. Furniture was toppled over and a television was broken, laying on the floor like a murder victim. In comparison to the living room, this place looked like hell. I mean, sure, the blood in the other room was jarring, but this was terrifying, and Steffi began to panic. "We need to leave right now," she said, tugging me back. I turned and grabbed her by the shoulder. "There's one more room. We'll look in and leave," I said, stern in my demeanor. "This room is ransacked. "That's proof enough. Let's go," she yelled. I didn't budge. "We'll leave as soon as we're done with the other room. Then we could get the hell out of here," I said. Steffi knew it was useless. She let go of me and grunted. "Fine. We'll look in there, indulge your sick fucking curiosity, and then we're gone," she snapped. She was obviously angry. I couldn't blame her, but we were too deep into this. We had to see for ourselves what caused this, if we could manage to find anything. I nodded and we left the room behind us. We stood in the hallway and stared at the final door. Steffi held onto my shoulder in fear and I held on to hers. We were both terrified out of our wits. I mean, who wouldn't be? But we had to find out what was behind that door for peace of mind at the very least. I slowly reached out to grab the handle, and when I held onto it, it felt miry. I would have reacted in disgust, but I was far too horrified to even give a damn or identify what it was. I turned the knob. The familiar clicking sound echoed throughout the house and rang in my ears. I slowly opened the wooden plank, Steffi gripping onto me tighter than she did before. The door was finally open, and we saw what the room's contents held. It was a disgusting place. The floor was stained in some type of liquid. Water, blood, I couldn't be too sure. The floor was wooden, but a divergence from the other rooms. It looked to have been occupied. The walls were stained. I knew this because the wall was light blue, and what was mixed in was definitely blood, feces, and various liquids that I was too shocked to identify. On the other end of the room were decomposing bodies, and from what I could tell, an old woman, 2 middle-aged police officers, and a man in a blood-stained white apron. Their skin was haphazardly ripped off to their bones, and others, what appeared to be gnawed off. Steffi vomited at our feet, but we didn't care. The sight was far too gory to even acknowledge what she did. And then we heard it. A soft clicking noise. It might have been our ears playing tricks on us, but for a moment, we heard it. 1 second, then it stopped. We halted our deep breaths and listened. In this hyper-focused tension, we finally noticed the structure and various things surrounding it. Stuffed animals and toys were ripped up and or broken. They were surrounding a crib. The room was a nursery. We saw more toys inside the crib, also torn up and ripped apart. Stuffed teddy bears, clowns, and generic things like that were all of a sudden transformed into terrifying abominations from the deepest pits of hell. Steffi and I were going borderline mad, and were about to turn around and make a dash for the hallway, when we were met with a horrifying noise. The crib creaked, and from under the toys, a mass rose up. The crib creaked with each moment the mass made. I moved the beam of light I had over towards it hesitantly, not sure if I wanted to see any further. I focused it and was able to see what it was. Its body was small and malnourished, the skin pale blue, seeming to be melting off, revealing its bones, coated lightly with blood. Its yellowed, rotting teeth were bare and came to a razor-sharp point. The eyes were sunken in and jaundiced. The irises seemed to be black, but it could have just been the lack of light making brown appear to be black. I'm not sure. But its nails were worn down, and the tips of its bones were showing. A guttural inhalation came from it. It growled, almost innocently, tilting its head towards Steffi. She dug her fingers into my shoulder, holding on for dear life, and it growled again, this time tilting its head towards me. I locked my eyes with the horrendous creature, and for a few moments, silence filled the room, before the creature sliced it open. A wide, toothy, ear-to-ear grin appeared on its deformed, gleeful face. It then let out a scream. At least, it sounded like one. It was hoarse and blood-curdling, but sounded nothing like a normal scream. It left its crib and darted at us, crawling on all fours in a crippled, malformed manner. I yelled for Steffi to go, dragging her with me. The jolt knocked her from her stupor, and she followed suit in front of me, taking a sharp right toward the hallway that led to our salvation. She reached for the handle and tried to open it, but it was jammed. I didn't know, and I couldn't stop as I came slamming into her, opening the door from the impact. We collapsed onto the porch. I quickly got up and ran, looking back to make sure Steffi got up as well. I stopped and turned to see that she hadn't. As she was on her feet, I saw the creature coming right behind her. As soon as she lifted her foot off the creaking wood, it dug its nails into her leg, causing her to scream. Disregarding her pain, I yanked her as hard as I could from the grip. Blood sprayed everywhere as chunks of her skin left her body. She wailed in pain, but as long as she was alive, that's all that mattered. I ran, carrying her. Her screams of protest were muffled by my sheer determination to get the hell out of there. I looked back and saw the thing in the doorway screaming at me. It was the only thing that pierced my eardrums. I gritted my teeth in pain as I continued to run. The car was just down the road, but it felt like a marathon. I opened the door and I threw Steffi inside. I ran around and got to my side, looking at the house, and the thing wasn't chasing us any longer. But that didn't stop my paranoia or tenacity, however, as I got into the car, turned it on, and slammed my foot on the gas. We sped away from Harborview Road. I didn't look back. I drove aimlessly, ignoring lights and forgetting the most basic rules of the road. Screw the turning signals and the signs. I needed to get Steffi and me away from the abomination. As soon as I came to a stop, I didn't know where it was, but to hell with it. We were far away from that god-forsaken home, and I was perfectly okay with that. I sucked in as much air as I could. When I finally came back to reality, I noticed something. Aside from my breath, there was no sound. None at all. I turned to Steffi. She was completely silent, looking out the windshield with a blank stare in her eyes. I figured she must have been terrified from the events that transpired. I was about to apologize for my actions, but then things started to blur. I can't remember if I did or not, but the next thing I knew, I was blacking out. The next thing I saw was my bedroom ceiling. I was in my bed, the familiar red quilt covering my nude body. It took a while to register, but when it did, I just assumed that I wanted to get out of those clothes. I was probably just too exhausted to get ready, but I didn't want my clothes on. I wish I knew, but again, my memory was hazy. I then remembered what happened before my blackout. Mortified, I used my cell phone and called Steffi's house. After a few intense moments of ringing, the phone was finally picked up by Stephanie's mom. I asked frantically if Steffi was all right. She was taken aback and told me that she was fine. A little sick, but okay. Now I was the one taken aback. I questioned her about the wound on her leg, but she said that she had never mentioned a wound on her leg, nor did she even have one. I was dumbfounded. I may have blacked out in the car, but everything else I remembered clear as day. I asked her if I could speak to Stephanie. It took some prying, but she agreed to it. After hearing the muffled sounds of her actions, I finally got Steffi on the phone. "Hello?" she said weakly. She sounded awful, like she had the flu or something. "Steffi, thank God, are you all right?" I asked, agitated by the stress of the past 2 hours. "Kinda. I feel like shit," she said, going into a slight coughing fit. "You remember what happened last night, right?" I pried. There was a few moments worth of silence before I finally got an answer. "Yeah," she replied. "My leg still aches, but there's nothing more." I was left in a stupor of confusion. Had any of that actually happened? I mean, it had to have happened. We both remember it as clear as day. There had to be an explanation for all of this. "Hello?" she asked, yanking me into reality once again. "Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just tired," I said. "I'm going back to bed, and you should probably get some rest too." "I will," she said, coughing again. "Bye, Steffi," I muttered groggily. "Wait," she said. "Yeah?" I asked, feeling a bit impatient. More silence was heard before she said something that sent a chill down my spine. "I feel sick." The phone clicked and a dialed tone rang, knocking against my skull. I gripped the phone for what seemed like an eternity before I set it down on the receiver. I slowly crawled back into bed, pulling the covers over my body. That last sentence rolling around in my head as my consciousness slipped away from me.